Hello everyone! In this video, I'm going to be showing the complete assembly process of an FP UC1 chassis. In the previous video that was uploaded, I built a 1/24th scale Mazda RX-7 using this chassis, and although I went into a lot of detail with that video, I wanted to make a standalone assembly tutorial to make the assembly process clear for anyone interested in building one of these chassis. If you haven't yet seen the RX-7 video that I released previously, I highly recommend checking it out. I've talked about this chassis before, but for those who aren't familiar with it, it's designed to be as simple as possible and to be constructed with easy to print parts. This chassis is suitable for most lightweight 1/24th and 1/25th scale bodies. I started off by printing all the parts. Any typical FDM printer should work well. I used a 0.35 nozzle and a 0.2 layer height to print all the parts. As long as the parts are printed well and are dimensionally accurate, everything will go together great. So take some time to ensure your printer is producing the best quality parts that it can. You can find the STL files on Patreon or physical parts for sale at the links below in the description. I printed out every size part as you can see here. Different size front end parts allow the front track width to be adjustable, so the chassis can be built to fit a large variety of bodies. All the hardware and non-printable parts you will need is here and can be ordered at the link provided in the description, along with a compatible electronics set seen here. I'll start by installing the bearings for the rear axle, which are press fit into the openings on the motor and rear axle mount piece. They might require a little light tapping to get them in. This rear mount is secured to the chassis using 4 1.6x5 screws. The wheelbase of the chassis is adjustable and can be modified by moving it towards the front or rear and mounting it in place. With the mount securely attached to the chassis, I next installed the rear threaded axle shaft. The axle goes through each bearing, and then I threaded two 4x2mm wheel mounts onto each side as shown. Make sure to keep the same length of axle sticking out on each side. After each mount is in place, and there is the same length on each side, I glue only the right side wheel mount in place. Make sure there is not too much excess glue to avoid seizing the bearing. After confirming that the axle can rotate smoothly, I secure the gear with the hole going all the way through it onto the left side of the axle, just like I did with the wheel mount on the right. I make sure to remove the wheel mount on the left side, as that was only to help position the axle and glue the right side mount into the correct spot. I also make sure that the gear is oriented correctly with the flanged side facing the bearing. Again, make sure that the axle can turn smoothly and there's not too much side-to-side movement. The next section to assemble is the front end parts. I start by selecting the bottom piece that I'll be using. As you can see, different sizes of these parts will allow the chassis to fit a wide variety of bodies with different widths. You might need to experiment some to get the correct fit for your body. It's also very helpful to have the wheels you plan on using on hand to make sure everything is lining up correctly and there are no fitment issues. Use the 2x6 screws to secure the lower piece to these rectangular support pieces. At this point, the knuckles can be assembled. Each knuckle uses two bearings that are placed in the front and back. These small parts that connect the knuckle to the steering center link are secured using two 1x3 screws. Make sure that they are oriented correctly. Two bearings go on the top and bottom of the knuckle. Both the upper and lower pieces have openings for the bearings to sit. The 2x6 screws are used to secure the top piece in place. Here is how it should look so far. An upper brace piece is optional and would be secured using these 4 screws on top. The front axles can be installed by sliding them through the bearings with the threaded side pointing away from the chassis. To prevent each from falling out, thread a wheel mount into place on each side. You'll need to apply some glue to keep them in place, but only do so after you've mocked everything up, just in case you need to make some changes. Also, make sure not to tighten the mounts too much, or the axles might not be able to spin freely. Any excess axle length can be cut off. Before adding the steering center link, I used a 1.6mm drill bit to ensure the holes are the correct size. After that, I used a 1.6x6 machine screw and nut on each side to secure the center link. Make sure the center link is sitting on top of the knuckles, not below it, as you can see here. With the front assembly complete, it can now be mounted to the front using 4 1.6x5 screws. Make sure the steering parts can move smoothly without any resistance. The steering servo mounts also use 1.6x5 screws to secure each to the chassis. Make sure each mount is oriented correctly, as seen here. I'll go ahead and install both the servo and motor. The servo can be secured using 1.6x5 screws, or with the screws included with the servo. You might find it easier to secure the servo to the mounts and connect the servo arm first before mounting it to the chassis. However, I had no problems doing it as shown here. The servo arm will need some minor modifications to be usable. The first being to cut the lower section off and drill the top hole to a 1.6mm diameter. The small screw included with the servo is what you'll use to secure the arm. After drilling the hole on the servo arm, I ensure that the hole on the center link is the correct size. Use the 1.6x8 machine screw and nut to secure the steering linkage parts together with a spacer in between. I use a 1.6x6 machine screw and nut to connect the other end to the servo arm. That's all it takes to get the steering linkage together. You may need to use some thread lock to prevent the nuts from coming loose. The motor is secured to the mount using two 1.6x4 machine screws, and the gear can be pressed onto the shaft. Make sure the gears can spin freely. Finally, you'll need to glue the wheel mounts for the rear wheels to connect to. I didn't glue mine since I haven't yet had the chance to mock up the body and figure out how far out they need to be positioned. Always make sure you mock everything up before permanently gluing parts in place to ensure that they are in the correct position. That concludes the assembly of the chassis. Obviously, it still needs wheels and a few electronics before it's ready to drive, but this is the basic overview of how all the chassis-specific parts are assembled and what hardware to use. In the next video, I'll be building a complete car using this chassis, so be sure to be on the lookout for that video. I hope you found this video helpful. As I said before, you'll find links to the parts used in the description. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your build.